Next up is Samuel Franco. He is the Executive Director of Kazakh Home Cultural Rescue Center in Antigua, Guatemala, and also a cultural heritage disaster resilience expert who we saw in Althea's video as well.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this important conference. I'm from Guatemala, and my experience has been many years in the museum field, 14 years in tangible cultural heritage. But recently, in the last 10 years, I became a cultural first aider, which is a new generation of people working to protect cultural property around the world. So I'm based in Guatemala, and our museum was chosen to be like a guinea pig for an experiment of this concept of the ambulance of culture, which I feel very proud that it was my concept, to create like an ambulance and that would go to places that of disasters, not to save people, but to save cultural property. So, of course, people are always priorities, but human beings have priorities. But after that, it's important to protect cultural property. So, we're based in Guatemala, Central America, which is a very vulnerable area in the world, in the planet. We're number 4 among the most vulnerable countries in the world for natural disasters because of volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, floods, all kinds of disasters. So we have this whole concept supported by Dutch money, by Prince Claus Fund. And we started in Central America, basically Central America and a little bit of the Caribbean. But I will present today. It is so this year, 2 months ago, it was launched the experiment in the Caribbean. We've been 4 years in Central America, and it's been very successful. There are now different hubs in the Balkans, in Lebanon, in Ukraine, and March 1st was the launching date of the Caribbean hub. So as we know, the Caribbean is a very vast geographical area. So it's quite a challenge. It's not like Central America that we can travel by land and logistics are easier. We have a same language, where in the Caribbean you have many languages, many governments, many legislations, because legislation is always by the hand of rescuing cultural property and whatever civil protection actions may be taken. You always have to work with the government or the army or the firemen, the Red Cross and all these institutions. So for the Caribbean, it's quite a challenge. So in March 1st, we established our first hub. Here you can see the usual or the most common hurricane path, according to historian. So there is a very typical pattern or route where hurricanes take place in the Caribbean. So that was a very important aspect to consider before establishing the first hub. Where we don't want to establish a place in a hurricane path because these hubs are to provide training to local to strengthen the local capacities because that's the main concept, to train local people so local communities so they are able to respond in emergency before international cooperation may arrive. And then also the idea is to provide materials, supplies, first requirement supplies that may be needed. Like for example, now we have floods in Brazil, and they ran out of drying paper. For example, for libraries, archives, documents, it's important to have this paper that absorbs water. So it's, they run out of it. Also, they have not personal protection equipment like helmets, rubber boots, gloves. So those are kind of some examples of supplies that these hubs will have, before you can get international cooperation. So the first the first hub in the Caribbean, or the main hub, because we will need sub hubs because being such a will be in Curacao, or it is in Curacao, right? Under the umbrella of the National Archives of Curacao. Why Curacao? Curacao is out of the hurricane path. And also it has the largest runaway for in an airport. That means that you can have big airplanes coming with supplies in times of emergency, and also because it's Dutch money, the Dutch colony. And but we have also the cooperation of the Dutch Navy to transport things, from island to island, because logistics in the Caribbean are very difficult. Even though you're next door to one island, you may have to go to Panama or Florida before going to a short distance. So I'm just showing you some nice pictures about the Caribbean, the culture in the Caribbean, because we also have to think about intangible cultural heritage. Because when there is a disaster, you have to evacuate people, to remove people to other areas. Maybe they find themselves that they are in a territory that they don't have the same resources as they grew up with their families, so they have to learn new trades to survive, which is it's quite a task. So Curacao again is part of the hub. But also the intangible cultural heritage I'm displayed here. There's a lot of intangible heritage in the Caribbean, with music, expressions, paintings, and all kinds of art expressions that are important. So also they survive, mainly the Caribbean islands mainly survive out of tourism. We have all these cruise ships that after COVID, it was a terrible experience, because the whole industry collapsed, because 90% of the income of the islands, especially islands like San Martin or those areas were affected with the lack of visitors. So these are some pictures in San Martin. We started working from Central America in 2018-19 for the Irma, Maria hurricanes that devastated St. Martin, Antigua, Barbuda. So that's where we started with our first trainings to people from archives, museums, libraries, and archaeological sites. Because there are museums like this one, is the one in Barbados. For example, the Barbados is also in a better off position, I should say, geographical position. We are considering to do a sub-hub in Barbados, because the history of hurricanes is not as bad as other islands. But of course, anything can change with all these climate changes. So there's nothing certain. So archive, this is the National Archive of San Martin, where we had a workshop in 2018. The archive is in good condition, but this is a new facility before the hurricanes. But a lot of documents were lost in this particular island, and that's all. That's the only one we know. But I'm sure in other islands it can happen the same. So we did this type of practical training, like simulations of a flood, of an earthquake, or a hurricane, sorry. So professionals from different institutions were trained or how to, the three phases of a disaster are the before, during, and after. So before, you can prepare, you do risk analysis of the institution, which is different for every institution. Every institution has a different context. So there's no standard emergency plan. So you have to do your own. And so we started doing that phase, and then the recovery part, the evacuation part, like now, this year we are expecting very bad hurricane season. Already, I just got the news from Guatemala this morning, and there are tropical storms already because it's the season, now is the change of season, especially after El Nino, La Nina, we have El Nino this year, and that creates also a lot of problems. We train to respond, how to respond, how to recover um, objects after a disaster, how to stabilize them, dry them, depending if they are especially organic materials like paper, textiles, and so also how to these evacuation procedures are important in order, if you evacuate, you have to take on account documentation in order not to have a disassociation of objects or mutants or missing objects. And also the packaging, will you pack it, how will you manipulate it, and where will you take them to a safe place, a temporary safe place. So these are practices based on ICROM manuals. I was trained with ICROM. ICROM has trained over 400 people around the world since the Haiti hurricanes, tsunamis in 2010. Before COVID, this was just a week before COVID, I got stranded in Barbados. And we had 18 people, people from 18 islands, one from the culture sector and one from the civil protection sector. So this was the first good action that we had, a positive action. We got together with the CIDIMA. CIDIMA is like the Caribbean Emergency Disaster Agency, and the director was there. So we started working an MOU with UNESCO Caribbean and also CIDIMA. So this is the launch in Curaçao just 2 months ago. Next. So Curaçao is a beautiful island, like the Netherlands in the Caribbean. We held this at the Maritime Museum in Curaçao. So there were representatives from UNESCO cultural sector, which is based in Jamaica, and the Netherlands disaster officer in Curaçao, which is mainly for humanitarian, but we're trying to connect the humanitarian efforts with also to include cultural property in legislations, in national plans. So this is more about the meeting, and this is these are the Curaçao representatives which are working under CARVICA. CARVICA is the ICA, International Council of Archives of the Caribbean. So that will be the umbrella of the whole, in order to have infrastructure for an office space, internet, whatever. So basically, that's a picture of the National Archive of Curaçao, and so I think we're about the end. Okay, so this is very important. This is the last slide. I know I have 1 more minute, but this is the structure that we may use for the sub-hubs, because this is that's based on the CIDIMA, which is the Civil Protection Agency, the structure that they have. So we don't have to invent the wheel, and we have to work with them, because even though you are a cultural property first aider, that doesn't mean that everybody will open the doors for you. You need credentials, national credentials from the government, so CIDIMA has it. So, there's a sub-region in Barbados, there's another one in Trinidad and Tobago, another one in Jamaica, and another one in Barbuda. Here is not Curaçao, but this is just a basic layout of what we can start working for. So I will be part of the, even though I'm Guatemalan, I have been invited to be part of the steering committee of the hub due to my experience in the Central American hub. And I'll be happy. I love the Caribbean. So it's not a hard task. So with this, I conclude and thank you very much for your kind attention.